This is Chapter 2, Section 3, Centrally Planned Economies. Centrally planned economies are the opposite of a free market. They oppose private property, the free market in general, pricing, competition, and consumer choice. How is a centrally planned economy organized? Well, as we talked about earlier, the central government answers the three questions that determine an economic system. So some sort of government agency, which is also known as a bureaucracy, decides what to produce, how to produce it, and who then gets to use those products. The government has complete control of factory resources and production. They own all land, labor, and capital for the entire country. There is no private property. You go to work when they tell you to. Your factory produces how much steel when they tell you to produce it and how they tell you to produce it. Everything is done by the government. You're just a pawn in the game. Example would be military uniforms and sweaters. So first thing that happens is planners decide to produce more military uniforms than sweaters. So military good versus a consumer good. So they send the materials to a committee. This committee is going to decide which factories are going to get what input so they can make uniforms and sweaters. These planners take the information about how much cotton their country produces and decide how many uniforms and how many sweaters will be produced. Then they give their decision to cotton makers and say, you need to make this much cotton for sweaters, this much cotton for uniforms. Same thing with button makers. We need this many buttons for uniforms, we need this many buttons for sweaters, and elastic, and everything else that goes into making a military uniform or a sweater. Then, all of the inputs, cotton, buttons, elastic, everything arrives at the factories where they're made into the finished products. Here's your problem. So let's say you're producing 100,000 military uniforms, 75,000 sweaters. What if this year 100,000 people need more sweaters? Well, the answer is pretty simple. 25,000 people aren't getting a sweater that year because there aren't any sweaters to be gotten. So they have to make do with what they have. Also, one of the big problems is the consumer goods aren't given the cream of the crop. The best cotton, the best buttons, the best of everything else is sent for the military uniforms. So some of the sweaters are going to be the wrong size, wrong shape, different size buttons, everything else. So the sweaters that are produced aren't even of that high quality. Why? Because there's no incentive for the factory owner to make more than his quota or to make his product better. He just needs to make 100 sweaters. Doesn't matter what color they are, how good they are, whether they fall apart in 5 minutes. He just needs to make his quota. Once he hits that, he's good. Next, we'll discuss the difference between socialism and communism. They're different. All the terms today are used synonymously. They are different. So first you're going to make a definition for socialism in your notes, then a definition for communism. What I'd like you to do is make a Venn diagram as well in your notes and put socialism in one bubble, communism another, and then fill out the Venn diagram. Differences, similarities, and we'll discuss them the next class period. So communism. Communism will only happen after a violent revolution, as in the workers, or what Karl Marx called the proletariat, will rise up, overthrow the government, overthrow the factory workers, and take control for themselves. What actually happens with the communist revolution is that the government and the business owners are overthrown, but they're replaced by authoritarian government. One dictator in control telling everyone what to do and how to do it. Your example would be the former Soviet Union or the USSR, also known as the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. What happened is Tsar Nicholas II was Tsar, monarch of Russia. He had lots of policies that were very unpopular, and when World War I happened, things just went horrible for him. He stepped down, a provisional government stepped in to rule the country. That provisional government continued to pledge the war effort against Germany, which angered many people, which led to the Bolshevik or Communist Revolution in Russia. And then for the next several decades, Russia became the Soviet Union. Let's talk about the central planned economy of the 1920s to 1991 on the USSR. The best land, labor, and capital were given to the military, the space program, large farms, and factories. They had one agency that decided production and process of 24 million different goods and services. Every good that was produced had to go through this one agency. It was very time-consuming, very cumbersome, very large bureaucracy. Let's talk about Soviet agriculture. They had state-run farms. They were owned by the government, and workers worked for a wage on the farm. So you went to work every day, you worked, you toiled on the land, and you were given a wage. Then they also had collectives, and you put a definition of that in your notes now. Here's some facts for you. In 1913, Russia was a leading producer of wheat. That's before World War I. Leading producer of wheat in the world. After 1917, after the Bolshevik Revolution, Russia had several famines and it was very hard to keep Russia fed. The reason for it is lack of incentives. If you own a collective farm or you're the supervisor on a collective farm and you need to produce 100 bushels of wheat, that's your quota. Once you get to your 100 bushels, you're good. You don't get any extra money, any extra wages, nothing extra for producing 200 bushels of wheat. All the government will do is pat you on the back and say thanks, and next year they're going to make your quota 200, which is harder to attain. So there's no incentive to get better. Soviet industry, heavy industry. Get a definition for that first. Because Soviet Union put so much of the factories of production into heavy industry, okay, and because countries only have so much land, labor, and capital, the consumer market suffered. As we talked about with the sweaters, okay, these sweaters in Russia, it's cold, okay, you need to make 75,000 of them. Well, number one, they weren't getting the best cotton that was going to the military. Number two, people making them had no incentive to make the best sweaters necessary. Why? Because no matter what, if you got a voucher for a sweater, you're going to take one because it's better than freezing to death. There's no incentive to make a good product or to make more. And once you met your quota, you got nothing out of it. Plus, say you didn't meet your quota, you still had a guaranteed wage and job. You were supposed to make 100 sweaters and you only made 50. There's not much they could do to you. Soviet consumers. We talked about how they earned a wage. Well, wages mean very little, but very few goods they could buy, and they were of poor quality. So they could have $100 million in the bank. They got nothing to spend it on. And the reason for it, as we said, is people made quantity, not quality. Yeah, I got to make 100 sweaters. I don't care what they look like, how they fit, or anything else. If one arm's longer than the next, I just want to make 100 so I can meet my quota, so I can be done. Housing was always a problem in Russia. They would build these collective apartments. They were very run down. They were built quickly so they could build the next one, and they weren't a fun place to live in. There was never enough of them made, even though they were of poor quality. And there's no incentive to build them quicker, to build them more efficiently. You're still going to be construction worker the next day you wake up, and you're still going to have the same job. So who cares how you build it? Here's some problems with century plan economy. First, we'll go with positives. It does jumpstart industries. It does guarantee jobs and income for people. So that's a good thing. Okay. There's a lot more negatives though than there are positives. Number one, poor quality products. There's always shortages. You can never make enough consumer goods for the demand. Plus diminishing production. The more you put into something, okay, more money, more time, more effort, to a point you will see increases. Okay. Then after a time, your production will level off and then will actually go down. So think about it. We're producing cars. We've got 2 people producing 4 automobiles all day. They can only make 2 cars a day. I had 3 people. I had 4 people. Now we can make 3 cars a day. Then 4. When I had 5 people, we make 5 cars a day. Up until a point. Why? So long as each individual person has one task, like, hey, all I'm gonna do is tighten the lug nuts on the tire. Okay, all I'm gonna do is put the tire on. That speeds up the production line. You do the same task over and over again, you're fine. But once every task in that assembly process is taken up, when you add a new worker, he doesn't have much to do. So what does he do? He tries to take from another person's job. He tries to carry the tire halfway to the person who's going to put the tire on the spokes, but the other person, he doesn't hand it off right, he doesn't grip it right, whatever. Now the other guy's got to take time to re-grip it, get it over there. It actually slows down the process and slows down the amount of production you could have. More problems with centrally planned economies. Performance often fell short of ideals. They had a quota, it was 100,000 sweaters. Although statistically impossible. They could never even make 75,000. And as we said, no matter what, they could never meet the consumer's wants or needs. There was no incentive to do better, no reward for technology and innovation, and that large bureaucracy that said you produce this is how much cotton you're getting, everything else is expensive. You got to pay those people salaries, and all they're doing is telling other people what to do. They lack flexibility. They can't respond to, this year we need to make 100,000 more sweaters, but we've only got so much product. They're not flexible, and it's a very complicated, time-consuming process. And in most centrally planned economies, you sacrifice individual freedoms for the overall state.